The industry is actually at capacity. We haven't got enough crews, we haven't got enough engineers, we haven't got enough geologists. It's literally on its knees.
Welcome to the Ground Investigation Podcast, a show featuring interviews and insights from leaders in the geotechnical and geo-environmental business world. Join host Michael Taylor as he discusses the ups and downs of running a business in the GI industry, getting geological experts to share their learnings and lessons, as well as their plans for the future, highlighting what they think will improve the ground investigation industry moving forward. Now, here is your host, Michael Taylor.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Ground Investigation Podcast. Today we have a true industry luminary joining us. With over 30 years experience in ground investigations, she's not just a leader but a passionate advocate for safety, growth and engineering excellence. She's managed multi-million pound projects, shaped industry standards and empowered countless professionals. And welcome our guest, the Managing Director of Concept Engineering Consultants, for an enlightening discussion in the world beneath our feet. Natalie Bews, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael. That's quite an introduction. Thanks for inviting me today, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be part of this podcast.
Good. I'm glad you are, Natalie. It's good to start with such enthusiasm. So I give a very, very brief introduction to yourself there. I just wondered if you can give us a little bit more background on yourself.
So I started in the industry in 1993. Which was a long time ago. So I have 30 years experience of only working in the geotechnical contracting side of the industry. And I started my career with Norwest Host Soil Engineering as a technician in the laboratory in Leeds. And I've been really fortunate and really lucky the way that my career has progressed, and I've been able to enjoy doing something that I'm really, really passionate about, and, you know, working with such lovely people and within an industry that I think really matters. So it's really lucky to be able to be in an industry that I really enjoy and to have a career in a sector that I'm really interested in.
Excellent. So in terms of getting into the industry initially, did you just fall into it like most people seem to have done, or what inspired you to go down that path?
So I did a applied engineering degree, and when I left, I graduated, came back to Yorkshire, and I knew I wanted to do something in the geotechnical industry and I wanted to use my degree, but at the time it was really difficult to break into the industry and to get a chance to be part of it. And, you know, I'd applied for countless jobs to be a mudlogger offshore and things like that because you didn't really know about ground investigation. And then just at the time I was, you know, working in a pub, actually, behind the bar. It must have been a slow night. It was a Tuesday or something. The colleague that I was working with was called Andrew. He, you know, we were saying, oh, you know, this is a bit boring or whatever. And he said, well, I'm not going to be here very long because my dad's going to get me a job on the rigs. And I was like, oh, what rigs? And he said, oh, you know, drilling rigs. And I was like, what kind of drilling rigs? And he said, oh, he works for a ground investigation company. I was like, oh, really? Which one? And he said, oh, it's Norwest Host. I said, what's your dad called? And he said he's called Bill. So I literally went home after that shift, got the phone book out because there was no internet or anything, and I found this company called Norwest Host and wrote them a letter. And it started off, you know, dear sir, I have recently been speaking to your Mr. Bill Sloan, and he suggested that I apply for a job. And they wrote back and they said, you know, please come for an interview. So I went to Leeds for an interview. I didn't hear anything for a week and I don't have any patience. So I phoned and I said, I've got another job and it's in the insurance sector, but I don't want it. So can I have a job with you? And they said, you know, well, there isn't a position for an engineer at the moment, but you can come and work in our lab. And I said, oh, that's fine. So I went and I started working as a technician in the lab, in the soil and rock laboratory. I was there for about 6 months and I was doing the descriptions once the U4s had been tested in the triaxles. I was doing the split and describes. I can remember every Friday I used to go to the top floor, you know, straight into the boss at the time was Jeff Ingman, straight into his office and say, can I be an engineer yet? And he'd say, not yet, there's not a position yet. And then after about, you know, 6 or 7 months, he said, yes, Monday. So I went to work on the Monday as an assistant engineering geologist, had all the inductions and read all the specifications, and then, you know, started my career as an engineering geologist. And then it was about a year later, after I first started, I got sent onto a site doing the logging, soil logging. It was a site in Disley, the A6, Disley and High Lane bypass. On my very first day, I walked into these offices and there was this enormous, tall man, great stature, not just in build, but in his presence and everything. And he said, "Now then, Miss Bews." I was like, "Oh, who is this?" He said, "You better not let me down because you've taken my name in vain." I was like, "Oh." It was Bill Sloan. I thought, oh my God. So he remembered that I'd written this letter. I'd never met him. And I hope I've never let him down. But that was the start of my real career, was Bill Sloan saying, "You better not let me down." And I hope I've made him proud. I really do.
I imagine, he would say that no chance of you letting him down. So you took an opportunity via a conversation, dug out the phone book, which is, of course, not what's done anymore, but you wrote a letter, they replied, you were impatient, you gave them a call, which is always good. It's always good to kind of do a follow-up. You took a different job in the lab, so it was a stepping stone towards being the engineer rather than having to take that, because some people, if they're not offered that exact position, they might not take it and they might go elsewhere and get into something completely different. However, you paid your dues, I suppose, in the lab. You learned how to do the log. So it's an interesting start, and I'm sure Bill was very proud of your progress.
Oh, I hope so. Because, we started in the lab, and that was a great foundation, actually, because working in the lab, you got to understand what kind of samples were needed for the different tests, how much sample is needed, when it's unsuitable, and why you're doing those tests, and how important the data is, and the accuracy of the data, because then it's used in designs and everything else. And so that was a really good foundation, and I'm really grateful for that, because that really set me up for the rest of my career, particularly as an engineering geologist, because I understood exactly why we were taking these samples and why it was so important to take the best possible samples out in the field and look after them and make sure they're transported properly and stored properly, because then they get tested and the results are so important.
It's a good stepping stone, isn't it? I think, and it's good to have that experience, to have an appreciation. I suppose most engineers don't generally have that, and they're just generally put out into the field. You know, you have to go and supervise a rig or trial pit, and that's generally, well, it wasn't my experience anyway. I think it was in most of the people I know. They kind of start like that. But actually being in the lab, because you don't really know, and when you first like, you don't even know what it entirely means and how it's going to be used for the end kind of product of the report and recommendations, etc.
Exactly that. And also, every kind of like the life of a sample coming out of the ground and being looked after properly, transported properly, and then, stored in temperature controlled environment. So that you're maintaining all of those parameters as if it was still in the ground and then testing it. That really resonated with me. So that when I was in the field and, people are taking samples or whatever, I'm saying you've got to look after that because somebody else is going to be doing something to it. The life of a sample, if you like, it goes through many phases. It doesn't stop once the drill has taken the sample. There's so much more that's needed from that sample.
It's a good way for people to start. Maybe that's how the industry should get people, or an appreciation as well. Because as some of the larger contracting companies, they will have a lab. I think I've seen the inside of a lab a couple of times. But really, maybe it would be ideal if the new engineers would do a few weeks, realize the appreciation, etc. And especially the logging, because obviously the logging is important as well.
Well, absolutely. And, doing the split and describes, that's a great start to understanding, the different geology and everything else. But so that when you do go into the field, you can straight away, you've got that logging training. There's formal training that you need to go on anyway. But you have confidence when you're trial pitting or if you're logging at the side of a rig and the samples are coming out, you've got the confidence to log them and log them accurately and stand by what you've put. It's really important. You can read all the British standards and everything, but when you're actually in the field, you're sticking your thumb in to see how firm or stiff it is or things like this. And you can also then, predict how an excavation might behave because there's no guarantees that it's not going to collapse or anything like that. But, having that really sound understanding and knowledge of material that's near the surface and how it behaves because you've seen it in the laboratory, you put it in triaxles and all the rest of it, what potentially can happen. And I think it's a really good foundation for any engineer to do a few months in a lab and just learn why we take these samples and what the results of the tests mean, just to make sure that when they are actually out in the field, they are the responsible person it's not just all down to the driller. they're all part of a team, and they have to work together and make sure that they're getting the very best samples and the highest quality, because it means something, it matters.
Yeah, definitely. Agreed. So you have over 30 years of experience in the field, as you mentioned. How have you seen the industry evolve and change over the years? And what do you think are the key drivers for the change?
Well, the change, there's been lots of advances, obviously, and first and foremost, the advances in safety are incredible.
Yeah.
So over the 30 years, just the difference in standards of safety and training and equipment, guarding on rigs and things like that, but also across the board of site investigation contracting, it's such a dangerous environment to work in. It's a really, really challenging space to be in. And the advances are incredible, because 30 years ago, it was literally steel toe caps and a hard hat. And now, just in the advances in PPE, but also the equipment that we use, the training and all of the daily briefings, the way that the RAMs and risk assessments and everything are prepared, and their dynamic documents. And those are the real advances, I think, have been down to the industry leaders and the companies that can invest in that change. And then that's, cascaded and trickled down to every member of the industry that's working in it. So that the changes in safety have been enormous, but also in the way that we capture data and how we manage it, how we deliver things. So, some of the things that drilling parameters recording, and it's got to be the future. And we were looking at that 10, 15 years ago. I think maybe I was at soil engineering at the time, it might have been a bit too quick, a bit before its time. But if we can, there's all different ways of collecting the data. And if you can collect it digitally in real time, it's got to be more accurate. But then when you take the samples and you test them in the lab and you can verify those field data sets, it just gives more and more information to the client with higher quality that they can manipulate, and they can then, design their foundations or whatever with a degree of certainty that the information they've got is accurate and it's of the highest possible standards.
In your CV that you sent across, it mentions about yourself kind of being a leader and a team player. Could you share an example of a challenging project where your leadership and teamwork skills have played a crucial role in its success?
I would hope that any project that I've ever worked on has kind of like taken it on as I would, whether it's a major project or not. So I think the key to leadership and to achieving the best outcome of any project, it's about teamwork. I don't think I would ever ask anybody, I would hope I've never asked anybody to do anything that I've not been prepared to do myself. And it's about working together as a team. The whole team on site contributes to the success an investigation or a project. And it's about not having slopey shoulders, but passing on responsibility to the individuals within that team for the particular task, so that they can grow and become the very best of themselves, not just in that particular project or that role, but in their whole career as well. So they're learning from that. And it's all about empowering people and sharing knowledge and not keeping things back for your own benefit or to promote yourself. It's all about teamwork, about sharing, about collaboration, and just empowering people to become the very best of themselves. And that's not just for their benefit, but it will benefit the whole team and it will benefit the company that we're working for.
Okay, so how have you gone about in a practical sense to kind of instill that into the team, and what kind of benefits have you seen from it?
So during, any project, it's about being involved with the whole team and planning before you actually get to the site. So putting together a really good set of RAMs based on the specification and the requirements, having a site walkover, planning every aspect of the work, and then getting everybody that's going to be in that team, in the delivery team, getting them involved. Having a team meeting before you go so that everybody's clear on what their role is, what their task is, and what the outcome of the project is as well. So we need to explain, making sure that they understand the programme, what their expectation is on a daily basis, so that they can almost meet and exceed that expectation. And so every day everybody gets a sense of achievement. So in the morning briefings, you say, this is your task today. This is what's expected of you, not just in terms of production, but in terms of behaviours and the way that we treat other people, the general public or the tenants or the farmers or whatever, because that's their livelihood. And, we're on their land and we've got to be respectful and everything else. So it's about behaviours and cultures and not just production and getting the job done as quickly as possible. Everybody has to behave in a safe manner, but also understand that everybody has a part to play, and the sum of the team is far greater than the individual, and that's the only way you can get a project done. So for every project that I take on, whether it's the ground investigation or a different project where we're looking at implementing a new system or changing anything within the business, it's about pulling a team together and explaining this is where we need to get to, having a discussion on how is the best way to do something, and getting everybody involved, because everybody has an opinion and we all have to be on the same page. That's how you achieve a positive outcome, with everybody participating and everybody contributing their experience and their knowledge and their thoughts, and then agreeing an approach and then going and doing it. Delivering what we say we're going to do, not just for the end product, the end client or the user or whatever, but for each other as well.
How do you kind of strike a balance between being a demanding but compassionate leader? How do you balance those? Because obviously you need things to get done. However, you have to be compassionate at the same time. How do you strike the balance with that?
I think I'm quite a hard taskmaster.
Yeah.
But, as I said, I wouldn't ask anybody to do anything that I'm not prepared to do myself. And if somebody is struggling with a particular task, I'm always ready to lend a hand and say, come on, let's do this together. Let's work it out together. And even in my early days, when I was on site, I'd get stuck in. I know it was a long time ago, but, I've helped pull casing when I've been doing installations. I've been up to my knees in mud, putting pneumatic piezometers in and all these things, because you're part of that team. You've got to, there's no point standing back and watching somebody struggle. You have to get in and help them and do it together. That's the only way that a project will succeed, if everybody plays their part. And if somebody needs a lift or whatever, then you do it. You do it together.
So you're saying you're quite a taskmaster, and from what you say also, sounds like you're a very hard worker. You don't mind mucking in, getting it done, especially in pulling casing. Where did that side of you come from? Did that just kind of develop, or where does that side of you come from? Because not everyone's, of course, that way inclined.
Well, I don't know. Crikey. I'm a very practical person, and I'd like to think that I'm always helpful. And, it's always better to help somebody than to demand something of them. It's always better to help somebody along to get the best results of them, not only for themselves, but also for the whole project. So I don't know, because you wouldn't just walk on by and see somebody struggle. You would always stop and say, can I help? Can I do something to assist? Because in my nature, I would never like to see anybody struggling with anything. But the important thing is to know when to walk away as well. When you say, right, they've got it, they're on top of it, it's time to leave, let them continue and progress once they've got over that milestone or that hurdle or whatever, and then they'll go on to succeeding. So I think it's a difficult question to ask, actually, Michael, because it's in a person's nature, isn't it?
Yeah.
You'd rather help than not, and see somebody struggle, and then they might fail, but then the project fails, and then you've failed yourself, haven't you? I would have let myself down.
Yeah, no, it is. It just kind of came to me because we were talking about being a taskmaster, etc. And you're obviously kind of someone who's a natural leader and kind of go-getter from our conversations previous to now, and looking through your CV, etc. as well. So I just kind of wondering kind of where that came from. I'd imagine it is.
Yeah, so I'm really driven. If somebody gives me something to do, then I have to do it to the absolute letter. And I can't always do that on my own. It takes teamwork, it takes lots of people. And so I would try and pass on my enthusiasm and make everybody, kind of lift everybody up, so that everybody wants to be going in the same journey and achieving that end goal. Because it's not just, if you're a project manager or a site agent, you're nothing without your team. Absolutely nothing. And that applies to every part of every aspect of my career. I'm nothing without the people that I've worked with. And I hope we've all made a success of every project or task that we've had. But it's all about communication. It's about sharing responsibilities, but also sharing knowledge and experience and mentoring and passing that on. It's really important to make people feel good about themselves. And every day, everybody deserves to go home thinking that they've achieved something good in the day. And I hope that I can contribute to some part of that. But also, it's really important to identify people's own skill sets and where their strengths are. So I'm no psychologist or anything like that, but if you're working with people, you can instinctively see what they enjoy. And if a person enjoys something, they're usually quite good at it. So it's all about, gearing tasks and things to enable that person to, first of all, enjoy what they're doing, because they'll do it safely and they'll do it properly and they'll do it to the very best of their ability. It's understanding where people's strengths lie and then playing towards those so that they then become the very best of themselves in whatever they're doing. But the key is, I think, communicating and understanding people and just being conscious of people's lifestyles. And we all go to work to earn money. But in this industry, it's a little bit more difficult than that, because a lot of the time people are working away from home, they're working away from their families, and they spend more time with their work colleagues than they do with their families. And so you have to strike that balance where you're a team and you've got a task to do, but people have other things going on in their lives, and you have to understand and be caring to others, because it's not just all about the job, it's about the person and the people that are doing it. And without them, without the drillers, without the DSOs, without the ground workers, where would this industry be? And they get up every Monday, they go off with their bag packed. The same with the engineers as well. And they go off for a week, 2 weeks, sometimes 3. And things are different now with different ways of communicating and things like that. But it's still hard to go away and work for long periods of time when you know that they've got wives, partners, families at home that are managing without them. So it's hard on families as well. The industry, it's a very difficult industry to work in, but it's understanding all of those pressures and working away from your family. For myself, I know from experience, I've always felt really guilty when I've gone off and, I'm staying in a hotel or I'm working away and I'm in the Highlands or wherever, and it's a nice place to work, but you have just walked away from your family and everything else, and, they're left, getting ready for school and going to work and managing the house and everything else. And it's not a bit of a jolly. So, when you are away, there is that sense of guilt and everything else, but you've got a job to do. And it's really good because I really enjoy, going out and you're in all these different environments. Every site is different. Every site is unique. You're with, hopefully, a team of people that you have fun with and you enjoy working with. It's a bit of a laugh and it's fantastic. But you have to balance that and you have to get the job done as well. So there's a balance between the socialising and the fun side of site work, but also there's a job to do and it needs to be done on programme and safely, and all the samples have to be taken, and we've got to meet and exceed the client's expectations. Without that teamwork, without explaining to everybody why we're on site, what we need to do, what we have to achieve, and then when it's done, we all go home and have some downtime with our families.
So from what you said, a question I'm kind of wondering about, which is when you're working away. So because this was just a while ago now, so attitudes to people working away, and what I'm referring to is women in particular here, because my wife worked away only a few years ago, and people saying, why are you working away? You should be at home with the kids. I'm just wondering how the attitude was back then in relation to that.
So when I started, I was quite young. I wasn't married. I didn't have a family, and I didn't receive any negative comments or anything like that. I was an engineer. I was there to do a job. I was never kind of like one of the lads and going out and getting, down the pub and all the rest of it. Don't get me wrong, I did, but it was that the attitudes are changing, because attitudes have changed an awful lot. And not necessarily, in my experience, required, because it didn't matter whether I was a woman or not. That was the job that I wanted to do. And there are sacrifices that you have to make in the same way that any male would make those same sacrifices. Yeah. They're away from their families and homes and everything else. Yeah. So what's the difference if you're a woman? There's not gender specific roles. And certainly not in the household. If you have children, it's a partnership. I'm quite sure there's lots and lots of fathers who are equally as adequate as parenting as mothers. So if it's part of your career and it's what you want to do, admittedly, I will say, if you are in a position and a career where you are having to work away from home and things like that, I would say get the very best childcare that you can afford. And that will give you peace of mind, because there's nothing more guilty than leaving your children at home and going back to work. So when I had my children, I had 6 weeks off and went straight back into work. And I purposely didn't take any maternity leave because I knew the industry moves so fast that I wouldn't be able to maintain my position. And also, if I'd have had some time off, I might not have come back. And I would want to always come back. So that was a conscious decision to only take a minimal amount of time off. And I went back to work full time because I didn't want to. I didn't want my career to stall because I'd had children. And there's no reason why anybody should. If people want to take some time out to do that, that's their choice. But for me, it was really important to have a family, to have my children. And I don't love them any less than, I would have if I'd have stayed at home. But it was important that I continued with a career as well as being a mum.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's good point to make there. It is, there's still a lingering attitude, although it is changing at the moment. I think there's still a lingering attitude with some people. There's a big drive now for more women to enter into the industry and in engineering in general.
There is. And, when I did have my children, I can remember going to an industry event, and another industry member said, "Oh, you've not taken any maternity leave. Are you not very maternal?"
Yeah.
Yes, I am. But I've also got a career, and I didn't want to have to play catch up to my male contemporaries because I'd taken time out to have a family. And it would have been catch up, undoubtedly. It would have been a catch up process. But there was that question was asked, "Are you not very maternal?" I said, "Well, I'm very maternal, but I'm also an engineering geologist and I'm ambitious, and I can balance my life and my engineering career and parenting. So you don't need to worry about that. I'll sort that out, thank you." But, this person was of a different generation, perhaps, and he perhaps had a wife who was a stay-at-home mum, but it wasn't me.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think it's for each generation is a different view on these things. Generation that's just coming up now would be completely different to the previous, and it's constantly changing and evolving people's thoughts and feelings of all natures, really. So you've been actively involved in the British Drilling Association for 2 decades now. What motivated you to engage in the industry associations, and how has the involvement benefited your career and the industry as a whole?
Well, I first came across the British Drilling Association when I was on that very first site with Bill Sloan. So Bill was the drilling supervisor, he was the drilling manager, and joined the site. It was a really big site and it went on for quite a few months. So the crews at the time, it was just the lead driller. They were audited by Brian Stringer, used to come out from the BDA. And, I can remember Bill, the drilling supervisor, saying, "Oh, well, we've got BDA's coming out today. They're going to be auditing the drillers. They're going to be going to this position, wherever." And all of the drillers were all pretty nervous. I'm thinking, "Oh, God, what's this all about? Why is everybody getting so et up about this BDA coming out?" And then I was at a rig for one of the audits, and nothing stopped. That was the main thing. He came and observed, and he looked at everything and checked the paperwork and everything else. It was a much simpler audit at the time, but it still meant something. And it really meant something not only to the company to have British Drilling Association audited drillers, it meant something to the drillers as well, because it was a competency, it was a qualification of sorts, it was a tick. You're doing a good job, you're competent, and you're good at your job, and you work safely, and you know what you're doing. It was a thing when the drillers were like, "Oh, I've been audited," and you'd hear them saying, "Oh, it was rubbish, it was this, it was that, oh, he picked me up on this." But actually, underneath it all, it was a boost because they were good, and that was the first kind of thing that I learned about the British Drilling Association, that they come out and they do this day of audit or whatever. Yes, it does disrupt things a little bit on site, but the drillers got something out of it and they felt good about it when it had been done. And then as things went on, particularly on the BDA side of things, I think as an industry body, whatever industry you're in, you should sign up to the industry bodies, because it's kind of like it unites all of the companies and all of the industry, and it helps to promote that one standard, or, the level that everybody needs to get to. And if you're in a big company, you've got to join into these things to help shape the company, to help shape the industry, and to raise standards, and to then cascade that down through the smaller companies to the one-man bands, so that everybody is working to the same standards of safety. Everybody understands the level that is required. So when I got involved actually in the BDA, first of all, because everybody was moaning about, not everybody, but people do moan about the industry, and they're saying, oh, well, what do the BDA do? The BDA is rubbish, the BDA is this, that or the other. I thought, if you want to moan about something, if you're going to complain about something, join and have a voice and change it from the inside, or help it to change to what it needs to be. It's a bit like, under 11s football or something like that. And there's the parents on the sideline, oh, ref, you're rubbish, ref, you didn't see that, ref, you're blind, whatever. But you know what? Don't complain about something you're not willing to give a go yourself. If you're going to complain, that ref, he's got his qualifications, he's done his DBS, he's done everything else. He gives up his time to volunteer and go and referee these kids playing football. They don't need people on the sidelines telling him that he's rubbish and all the rest of it. And that's a bit like the BDA and some members of the industry who will give it a slagging off. But if you're not willing to get stuck in and be a part of it and change it and voice your opinion properly in a sensible, mature way, it's not going to change. It's not going to change to what that person wants it to be. So I always say, if you want something to change, then get involved and be part of it. So when I first joined the BDA, I wasn't on the main committee or anything like that. I was just joined part of the marketing committee, because people were saying, well, what do the BDA do? They're much more than just audits and things like that. So I joined the marketing committee to try and explain to the whole industry through various channels what the BDA actually does. And they write technical papers, and they write, raise standards, and they do a whole lot more than just the BDA audit. I think it's a really progressive association. They are up against it because everybody's got something to say, but not a single person on the committees or the subcommittees are paid. They volunteer their time. And I know for a fact that everybody's got a day job that's on those committees. They've all got a day job. They've all got responsibilities and things to do for the companies that they work for. But they come together and they meet and they do stuff in their own time, writing new standards and promoting the industry and better standards for the good of everybody in it. So if people are just going to take a back seat and slag it off, I'm really disappointed with them, because I always say, if you're going to say that, join. Give up some of your time and contribute. With the BDA, I think it is worthwhile, and I've always supported it. Whichever company that I've worked at, I've always made sure that they joined the BDA as a corporate member and then started looking to get their drillers audited. Because going back to when I was first on site and seeing the drillers and they're audited and they get a BDA achievement, if you like, it's good. It's really good. It's worth something. But also, when I was with the BDA, just doing the marketing things, so we've got to promote best practice. Because all the industries, particularly the big companies, they've got innovation, they've got things that, that they're promoting that make them a little bit different, not just in terms of the way they capture the information or whatever, but in terms of safety and things like that. And I think the BDA is the best place to share industry best practice and industry innovation so that everybody in the industry can learn. So we started doing these seminars, 3 seminars a year, inviting technical speakers and people from the industry to talk about innovation, driving change, driving safety, and real case studies and some facts behind it. You did have to pay to go to these events, but it's not expensive. And they don't make any money at all. In fact, there's a whole finance committee trying to balance the books of the BDA because they don't make a lot of money. They don't make any money, the members, the volunteers, as I've said. So there's an awful lot that goes on in the background of the BDA. And setting up these seminars, it's not an easy thing because, again, all of the speakers, all of the presenters, they're presenting in their own time. They're preparing all of these presentations and everything in their own time. But they're going and they're giving up their time and they're sharing it with the rest of the industry to hopefully get the standards raised. And also to sometimes we have to educate upwards to the consultant engineers and the designers of site investigation, the people that are scoping the investigations. They're the ones that actually need to understand the innovations in the industry so that they can specify them abreast and they understand the new, if you like, things that they can buy as part of a site investigation. They're never going to be given away for free, so they need to be specified. So it was trying to get that link between ground investigation contractors and ground investigation designers and specifiers, so that they understand just how brilliant the industry is and all of the innovations and the changes that the industry drives. Also, the industry, the ground investigation contracting industry, they're quite shy. They don't shout about brilliant things that happen. They kind of like hide their light under a bushel and they say, well, why? We're not going to change things unless we tell everybody how brilliant we are. And so the BDA marketing and these seminars, that's exactly the place for that to happen, and they can gain from it.
So when I deal with drillers in the recruitment sense, it is always good when on their CV it has a BDA audited driller, which is always good because the clients are quite delighted to have them as a BDA audited driller as well. Although it doesn't necessarily mean that perhaps that they're better than that driller, but it does mean a light has been shone in an industry standard way and they have passed, which I don't think is a bad thing.
No, exactly that. So, and that's another thing that needs to be explained. Being a BDA audited driller doesn't make you a better driller than somebody that isn't audited. But what it does do is give assurance to the client side that the standards that are required and specified in their specification are absolutely going to be met. So the rig will be properly guarded, it will be properly maintained, it'll have all of its certificates, and the driller will do a daily check and he'll make sure that he's operating a rig that's suitable for the task. But also his logs will be written out correctly. He'll be sampling properly. He'll be doing the SPTs or any in situ testing in accordance with the specification. He'll be installing properly. He'll be making sure that, he's working in a safe environment. He'll be conscious of access and egress and reinstatement. All of that's really, really important. And that if you've got a BDA driller on site, you know that all those things are going to happen. I'm not saying that unaccredited drillers don't do all of that. I'm just saying it gives assurance to the client and the customer. And I think that's what we need to do. We always need to assure our client and customer that we are doing what we say we're doing. Do what it says on the tin. And having an audited driller is a big tick in that box. Not only just for the safety side of things, it's for everything. It's about behaviours and the culture and everything, and being part of that site team. It's very important.
I suppose some of so we would deal with, they would have their own kind of internal training programs. Some of the larger companies that have their own sort of skills, in which I think at the end would be certificated. But of course, it's not an industry standard but it is a company standard,
and that's fine. And there are lots of companies and individuals that say, we've got our own company standard and, we do our own checks and it's absolutely rigorous and all the rest of it. So, well, that's great. To get to that standard, which meets or exceeds the British Drilling Association audited driller standard, that's absolutely fine. And I'm quite sure that the company that says they're doing that, they've invested a lot of time and effort and money and downtime, as in when the driller isn't working, into that individual to make sure he meets and exceeds all expectation and works safely. So that's all well and good. But why not invest that same money in having the BDA come and audit the driller and have an independent auditor come along and say, you're absolutely right. We can all mark our own homework. But if you're spending the money on and you're investing into your workforce, what's the difference of having that investment go to the BDA, which is an industry body and it works really hard. It tries to share all of best practice and everything else. Why be afraid of having a BDA audit? Either way, it's costing the company money to get to the standard that they're at. So what's the difference?
I suppose it requires more and more companies to do it to give it more clout, I suppose, in the industry. The more people that do go that route, then they kind of become more, not powerful, maybe that's not the correct word.
Yeah, it gives it more credence, doesn't it? So if, for example, you've got a company, a consultant engineer, or whoever's going to be the designer or the specifier and the investigation supervisor, and it says, there's a requirement for BDA audited or independent equivalent or whatever, and you tick the box and say, yes, I've got them. What's really important is that information, that requirement, passes through to when that company is drilling on site. And you can present a BDA card, or you can go onto the BDA website and you can put the driller, the company, and the driller's name or whatever, and it says, yes, he's accredited. Whereas if it's an independent audit or if it's done in-house, how's that checked? And I've written on the BDA, I don't know whether it's still on the website, the individual, there's different skill cards, and the engineers who are supervising, they should ask for them and say, where's your skill card? Let me have a look at it. Tick, yeah, absolutely. The BDA, that's fine. How are they going to do that when it's done in-house? Is the driller going to say, oh, well, actually, I've got the business management system in my back pocket. Just let me get that out for you. No, he's not. But if he's got a BDA card, he'll say, there you go. I'm a BDA audited driller. It's simple.
It's a bit easier and more transparent for the industry as a whole.
Absolutely, yeah. We're putting together reams and reams and reams of supporting documentation when you're bidding for a project. So you not only a pre-qualification stage, which is a huge task in itself, you have to, put all of your experience and case studies and your business management systems and your health and safety and everything else. You put all of that into the PQQ, and then when it comes to tender stage, you put it all in again. And then when you're putting your supporting document together and it's your methodology and approach, you say, we will be using a BDA audited driller or whatever. And so you've got those 3 stages before you've even got to site. And then what I'd really like to see is when we're on site, somebody from the client side, from the IS or the consultant engineer or the supervisor, whoever, goes, actually, in your documents, you said 3 times you're going to use an audited driller. I'm just going to check that. They need to understand what they've asked for and make sure they've got it.
So, on another note, in relation to safety is a top priority in the geotechnical industry. Can you discuss some of the important things about the experience and training and how it's influenced your work and the industry in general?
So safety, I mean, it's the foundation of everything that we do, isn't it? You've got everything that you do, from getting up in the morning and driving to work, you've got to behave in a safe manner. And that was really part of when I first started at Norris Horse and Soil Engineering. They had a really strong culture that was driven by safety, and they invested heavily in safety. So safety training days, stand down days for safety, and it wasn't just the engineers, so they knew how to run a site safely. It was everybody was invited and mandated to go to these events for safety training. And companies invest an awful lot of money in plant and equipment, but also investment into your staff, investment into training for safety to make sure everybody is working in a safe manner, protecting themselves, the environment that they're working in, everything else. And it pays dividends because it's everything that we do. And so if everybody is thinking and working in a safe manner and they've got safe systems of work in place, then there shouldn't be terrible accidents. And I think over the past 30 years, the industry has seen an amazing achievement in advances in safety with fewer accidents, fewer vid-or injuries. And it's all down to investment in training. People say you can't put a price on training, but you can. And it's expensive, but it's an investment into your staff and making sure that they are operating in a safe way all the time, every day. Because we all deserve to go home at the end of a shift, at the end of a week, or at the end of a site project. Everybody deserves to go home. Nobody should get hurt at work. So in a way, that when I was with Soil Engineering, because they invest so much into behavioural safety Wherever I've been, I've tried to make sure that we kind of replicate that. I don't work for a very big company at the moment, but I work in a group of companies, and there's an emphasis on stand down days, training, and before every single shift starts, there has to be a morning DABS, daily activities briefing, and that includes not only just telling everybody, this is your task for the day, this is your expectation. It's all about saying, right, it's really dangerous out there. Don't forget, you do your rig check, you make sure everything's check safe. Don't start work unless everything's in right order. Don't be afraid to stop, and make sure that you understand what you've been asked to do. So that morning briefing is really important, because you run through the risks and the method statements of what's going to be done for the day, so that everybody is clear in their mind. These are the risks, these are the methods and the safe systems of work that are going to mitigate those risks. And I know I'm going to do a good job, and I'm going to do it safely. And that has to be done every single day, because people do get complacent. So taking that, it's only 15, 20 minutes every morning. It's really important. And not only does it explain the risks of the day, it's also really important for everybody on the site team to be together, because you're a team. I've said before, it's the sum of the individual is much greater than the individual parts. So getting everybody together in the morning, you're all on the same page, you're all facing the same challenges, and whether it's the weather or the ground conditions or whatever it is, but you're all setting off and you're working together and you're working safely and you all know what you're supposed to be doing. And I think that in itself sets you up for a good day.
To do things daily and get into a nice routine, and it's not a case of what should we do, it's a case of, well, it's this time, so therefore we need to get on with this, like a daily meeting at 10 a.m. or whatever it is that people do in their own particular companies and their own particular tasks. So in terms of your career so far, you've had some various roles, from assistant geologist to obviously managing director. How did you navigate the transitions, and what kind of learnings have you taken from each stage?
Yeah, so lab technician, and then assistant engineering geologist, and then geologist, project manager, senior engineer. There's obviously that kind of path that was more involved in project management and site works and things like that. And I've never really thought that I ought to be there. So I've always looked up to people, and, I've had some great mentors throughout my career. Every day I would hope that I go to work thinking it's a new day, but I need to learn, and just learning as I've gone along, building my career off of the back of experiences that I've learned from other people, and then hopefully pass those on as well as I've progressed. Around about, oh gosh, how old am I? It must have been about 18, 19 years ago. I requested to have a change of direction with less site works, because I was wanting to start a family and things like that. So I progressed into assistant business development, with working with a guy called Mike Newton. He was an engineering geologist as well, so he'd moved into that role. I learned such a lot from Mike about not just marketing, but more about how to chase and achieve the opportunity to tender. So we worked in pre-construct, in estimating and tendering. And at first I was putting together the approach and the methodology of the supporting documents to go with the tender, to, give the client side confidence in what we were proposing to do if we won the work. So I was drawing on my experience as an engineer and all of the different jobs that I'd done, projects that I'd done, putting together, how we're going to approach it, what routes of access and all the rest of it, what techniques we might use, the drill bit configuration, all that kind of stuff. And then in between hundreds of those to do with every single project, but that was part of winning the work. And I really, really enjoyed that kind of, it's almost a chase of a tender to get it to award. But then I realised it's not just the tender. It's not the tender that gets you an award. It's finding the initial opportunity to tender. So looking at the industry as a whole, looking at the economy, looking at the construction sector and saying, right, that sector is going to be growing. I need to get into the water or whatever, and making sure you were in early enough and speaking to the right people. Early contractor involvement doesn't just start with when you're doing or preparing to go to site. It starts before the tender's even out, so that you can start saying, well, you're going to need a ground investigation, you're going to need, rotary or whatever. We start talking to them and making sure that when they're actually scoping the ground investigation, it's actually adequate and appropriate for the end use of that site. So really, getting in nice and early, meeting people and chasing down the opportunities before they've come out onto the public tender. It's all about building relationships with people. So I can remember I used to sit opposite Mike, and when I was first starting, he used to say, right, there's these particular jobs or these particular projects that are going to need a site investigation. You have to ring up. So back to the old telephone. So I was ringing these clients up, cold calling, and you start having a conversation with them. And I used to keep a log of everybody I'd spoken to, and when I thought I needed to ring them again in 2 weeks or whatever. And there was one particular job I was chasing, and it was the Brighton Pier. Oh, it's a long time ago, but I've been ringing this guy. He was from the client side, from consultancy. He was scoping the works, and I was going, ringing up every couple of weeks. When's the tender coming out? Make sure we're on the tender list. We're very keen on this job. If we were going to do it, we'd do it with a jack up, blah, blah, blah. And then I got into work one day, and Mike said, you better ring up about Brighton Pier. I was like, oh, what's happened? He went, it's burnt down. I was like, oh no. So, I'd been chasing it for about 6 months, and it's burnt down. I was like, oh no. So I thought, oh, I better ring up. So I phoned up and I went, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that it's burnt down. And this guy on the phone was like, oh yeah, all the work I've been doing for 6 months, it's just gone. I was like, never mind, what's the next job? And I was straight what's next? What can we get next? And I was straight on to the next job, because any ground investigation company is hungry and we need opportunities. So it's all about, getting that relationship with somebody and chasing down the opportunity and making sure that it comes onto your desk or into your company so that you have a chance to do it. And so I learned really early on from Mike, you've got to get into the ribs of these people and make them remember you and make sure that you're on the tender list. But I've never been so disappointed as I was when that pier burnt down. It's just because everybody puts so much effort in before we're even on site. There's a lot of effort goes on just to put a scope and a specification together for a ground investigation, and it had gone. So I was really disappointed, but onwards and upwards. I think we got something at Southend instead. But anyway,
There's kind of similarities, really, and I suppose it's just kind of the business development. But I would akin kind of the tendering process for the ground investigation company similar to almost the recruitment, because you can spend a lot of time and effort on doing something, and of course you only kind of have such a percentage of hit rate. So actually, all of that week is just you can't send an invoice for that. You're not going to get paid for any of that work. You can provide a good service, and you think, well, next time, hopefully it will come from yourself. And the cold calling as well, in relation to the business development. I was wondering if you could just give us a few tips for the audience, really, in terms of business development, cold calling, that sort of thing, because some of the smaller companies who are just starting and kind of have aspirations to become bigger. I wonder if you could just give us a few tips.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. So nothing's really changed over the 30 years I've been in the industry. A lot of work is generated and opportunities come from having a relationship with your customers or the decision makers or the specifiers. And so it's really important to know people and to understand them and to have a relationship with them where they will pick the phone up and say, oh, Natalie, we're going to do this. What do you think we should do? Do you think it's a rotary, or is it window sampling, dynamic sampling, or just some trial pits? And that's really important to have that relationship. So the best way to do that is actually to go along to industry events and do networking, meet somebody face to face, not on Teams, not on email, keypad warriors, all the rest of it. LinkedIn's brilliant because you can get an introduction to somebody online or whatever. Mm-hmm. But actually going and meeting that person and networking at these events with BDA and AGS and all, it's really important. And then you put a face to the email or whatever and you go, oh, hi, I've seen on LinkedIn you've been doing this, that, and the other. And then straight away you struck up a conversation and, you want them to remember you. because when they do have that opportunity, you want them to send you an email with the opportunity on it, or even better, pick the phone up. I do send lots of emails, but I always try to ring people up because I think I'm a bit of a people person, and I'd much rather have a conversation with somebody than toing and froing on emails, because that's just a bit boring and a bit distant. So I'd always advocate going to industry events, meeting people, networking with people, striking up a conversation. You've got everything. If nothing else, you've got the industry in common. And this is such a strange industry that it's not by chance that people come into it. People are in it because they want to be in it, because they enjoy being in it. So you've got a rapport straight away. And everybody, we're either somebody wants a ground investigation or somebody wants to provide ground investigation. It's a win-win situation. The complex bit comes in where you've got to put your tender and your proposal together, and it's got to be better than everybody else's. And fortunately, it's not just on price anymore. It's on all this supporting information, your approach, your methodology, giving the customer confidence that you've done it before, you can do it for them. You know how to stick to a program, you know how to do things safely, you don't cut corners, you absolutely do everything, meet and exceed their expectations. And that's where having things like ISO accreditations and being part of Construction Line, being part of the BDA and the AGS and these industry bodies is really important, because it gives the client confidence. And that's how we end up on sites, because the customer has confidence in us. And so you go to site and you do exactly what you said you were going to do.
Okay, so you mentioned in relation to proposals, and you're right. So someone might ask for tenders, you might have four competitors for that. Maybe it's more dependent on what the actual company and the project is and capabilities. How do you kind of make your proposal stand out? Because you're right, you don't want to do it just based on cost, because if everyone just does it based on cost, it's just a race to the bottom. Eventually, there's no money, there's no investment, and that's bad for the future of the industry. Of course, everyone wants to save some money, but if everyone's consultants or the government bodies don't want to pay anything, then it would erode the health and safety, for instance. That costs money. And so
Yeah.
companies have to be profitable.
They do, and companies have to be profitable, and there's absolutely no gain in doing a project at cost or whatever. It's everybody needs to make some money, but you pay for what you get. That is the harsh truth of it. I mean, I used to put out a picture of there's a guy having his back tattooed, and he's got a picture of I think it's Pegasus. The horse with the and everything, and the guy's tattooing on his back, and it looks like a plesiosaur or something, and it says you pay for what you get. And that's exactly the same with investigation. You pay for what you get. And ground investigation isn't cheap. It's really important to get it right first time. So if you can speak to a contractor and say, look, we've got this project, and you're right, pre-construction activities, tendering activities, it's not for profit. Nobody makes any money. You just have to do it and suck it up. And a lot of effort does go into putting those and preparing those documents. But if the project is scoped correctly and specified appropriately, then the investigation is actually amazing value for money, as long as you get it right the first time. And having those discussions with the ground investigation sector, with the ground investigation contractors, will help all clients to get it right first time. Everybody has it in their nature to be helpful, because it will help them to get the job. So it's all about communication and dialogue, isn't it? And working collaboratively and developing the scopes together. But what's really important is understanding how important the ground investigation is to the whole life of the project. So I've done presentations about the importance of site investigation and getting the greatest value out of it. And it's based on a paper that Tim Chapman wrote. And it's a long time ago, and forgive me if I get these figures wrong. I think overall the ground investigation costs around about 1%, less than 1% of the overall construction of the finished product. So that's how little the construction industry value site investigation, less than 1%, which is terrible. But if you paid an extra 10% for your ground investigation, you will achieve a 1% saving on your overall project, which is huge. But it's just getting people to understand that ground investigation isn't the necessary evil. It's actually really important because it will help reduce risk throughout the life of the construction phase. And the more ground investigation you have, the greater the reduction in risk. But also having it done at the right time as well. So, and completing the full scope of works. And, all of that is really important. What's fundamentally important is going along and having your investigation and making sure that your supervising engineer or the IS or the design engineer understands they need to get all of the information the first time. Not going and doing 10 boreholes and saying, that's fine, thank you very much, that's 10 boreholes to 10 metres and off you go. And then when they get the results, they'll go, oh, actually, we didn't get into Rockhead, or we didn't go deep enough, or we didn't do this or that. And then they have to scope another ground investigation. And bearing in mind all the cost and effort that goes into scoping an investigation, and then you've got to get all the accesses, the permits and everything else. So the cost of not actually looking at the data whilst you were on site the first time and assessing it in real time and saying, actually, we want you to go to 15 metres, or can you do another borehole, or can you just do a bit more? That's far cheaper than having to scope a whole new investigation, going out to tender, reviewing all of the tenders, going through the award process, and then the cost of mobilising to site. The mobilisation is the biggest part of any project. So you've got all of that to do again. If they're already on site, just take some time to think, actually, I'm just going to get them to do another borehole, because that will be a fraction of the cost of going through that whole process again. And also, don't forget, if you've got to go back and do supplementary ground investigations, the project programme as a whole is being set back. And then you're putting the whole construction phase at risk because they're going to overshoot their end date, their end target. Or they're going to start rushing. And we all know if you're rushing, you're having accidents and you're jeopardising things. So just get the ground investigation right the first time. Scope enough. It's dynamic. Nobody ever said no to an extra borehole. Nobody ever said, no, I'm not going deeper. It's far cheaper and cost effective to do it when you're on site the first time than to come away, scratch your head and think, oh, I need another ground investigation. And when you get another ground investigation, it might be a different company, it might be different drillers. We all work to the same industry standards, but it's going to be different. You've got to wait for it. And there's a break in that data kind of chain, if you like, and you've got to link it all together. So just get it right the first time. And don't be afraid to ask for more, because it will cost your client far less in the long run.
You mentioned about some people think it's kind of a necessary evil tick box thing to get out of the way with, hopefully spend as least amount as money as possible. What can the industry do in general to kind of educate those and those companies so that it can change their mind or view on a practical basis? What could they do?
Every big project is getting much better. So at the end of major projects, and there's always, all hands in, lessons learned, best practice, sharing it and all the rest of it. And you can identify these things. And the way the industry is changing, particularly for major projects in the public sector, especially HS2 and these really big mega projects, the whole site team, the client side, the consultant engineers, the tier one contractors, they're all on site. And it's a team effort. And so, it is very dynamic. I would hate to think that for any reason they've gone to the end of the job and they've said, right, we've drilled all the boreholes and everything's finished, so you can leave now. And then, 3 weeks later they go, oh, we should have had some more. I don't think that happens anymore. The reason we go back to sites is because we didn't have access, or access wasn't arranged, or there's a particular issue why. It's not so much because the client didn't say, yes, you can spend a bit more. But on the private sector, it's a bit different. And people do say, oh, I think I need 5 boreholes, but can I have 3? And I say, well, you're better off with 5. And if you can afford 6, have 6, because it will save you in the long run. And that's where the public sector and the private sector are completely different animals, if you like. And the private sector is, on the whole, a little bit less educated, because sometimes they'll not go to a consultant engineer and they'll go to a ground investigation contractor and ask for everything, factual and interpretative report and some design parameters, but also the actual design or ground remediation strategies or whatever. And that's where you need to be in there quite nice and early and advising and being honest and transparent and not trying to make a quick buck, but because you want a repeat business. You want that person to trust you and come back and build a relationship with them. So if we can help educate anybody from the construction sector, construction engineering or anything, about the importance of site investigation and how it can actually save you money, then I think that's the biggest thing that we need to drive. And the BDA, the AGS and all these industry bodies, they are constantly trying to promote ground investigation, not for the industry itself. The industry is actually at capacity. We haven't got enough crews, we haven't got enough engineers, we haven't got enough geologists. It's literally on its knees.
Finding the right staff is hard, really hard. At GI Rec Limited, we understand the ground investigation market inside out and can make all the difference to your recruitment woes. You need to concentrate on running the business, which is very difficult to do without the correct number of qualified staff. We can help you get your time back and lower your stress levels. We only work with talented, referenced, and often entirely exclusive candidates across the ground engineering sector. Wouldn't that be nice? It's not a dream, it's a reality for many of our happy customers. Get in touch with the team now to book a call. Just email info@girec.co.uk to book a call, or click the link in the show notes now.
Against what needs to be done. But we're constantly pushing and saying you actually need to have more ground investigation to give you greater depth of data, so that when you're doing your construction project or whatever, you have assurances, you can be confident that you've had enough of this ground investigation. And it does remove commercial risk. It's a proven fact. It reduces commercial risk, because the only thing that changes in the construction phase, when it's actually being built, because the plans are all designed by architects, house builders can predict cost down to the pound of how much it will cost to build a house. So the only thing that's variable and unknown is actually the ground conditions. So if you understand the ground conditions and you've got a full appreciation of the ground conditions, then nothing can affect that build. So, and the only reason it can be affected is unforeseen ground conditions, where they have to think, oh, hang on, these foundations aren't appropriate, these piles aren't deep enough or whatever. And then they have to have another ground investigation, redesign their piles, their foundation solution, whatever, and then start again. And of course, that all costs money, because it pushes the construction phase beyond the end of the programme. And then you get into compensation events and God knows what else. But it's all down to inadequate investigation in the first place. So if you've got an adequate and appropriate ground investigation and you understand the ground implicitly, then that will secure the construction phase of the project, and that will give assurance and confidence in the costs and everything else. So I'm on my soapbox now, but that's the thing that we need to, as an industry, we need to try and get through to contractors, tier 1 contractors, the actual construction companies. That's why ground investigation is so important.
Okay. You mentioned in relation to kind of there not being enough drillers, not being enough engineers. So throughout your work history in different companies, how have you seen different companies and other companies in the industry, affect that in terms of recruitment for their own company to attract and retain staff?
It's always been a challenge, because it's an environment that we work in that not everybody wants to, So, and it's often quite dangerous. You can be working on network rails assets. You need particular training to do that, PTS, all the rest of it. You've been working on the live motorways and things like that. So or even just, reservoirs. God knows, every location, every environment is different, and it's not for everybody. But what is for everybody is being appropriately trained. Making sure that for recruitment, it doesn't matter whether you're an engineer or, you're working in stores or the lab, or you're a driller, a ground worker, whatever, it's really important to have a really clear career path for every individual and not pigeonhole them to one thing. So Concept, we have a training and skills matrix, and it covers everything from how to do an SPT all the way to writing an interpretative report. And in between all of that, there's all about, how to raise a purchase order properly, how to measure your project to program, and all these things. And when a person starts with the company, they start in their particular role and they start on that section of the training skills and matrix. But once they've achieved those, then they can go into any other area that they want to widen the breadth of their learning and experience. And that applies to the lab technicians, the drillers, everybody. There's no reason why a ground worker can't progress to being a project manager. There is no reason at all, so long as the company is investing in all of the training and development of that person. So there's other companies, and we've got ours at Concept. We have a graduate training program. It lasts for 2 years, and there's all these individual modules, and they've got a mentor, and they have to check in with their mentor every month, and they have to gather evidence that, they've done 25 trial pits in different geology, and they've logged it properly, they've photographed it properly, they've sampled it properly, but they have to gather all of this evidence and take it to the mentor. And I know that other companies are the same, soil engineering and things like that. It's all about investing in your staff. And so when we go to careers fairs, or when we're looking to recruit drilling crews or a DSO or anybody, we can say, when you join this company, you're not going to be pigeonholed. You're not just going to be put into that little one job. There's a whole lot more that you can do, and making sure that they believe in themselves, that they can go on this career path and this journey. And, I started off in a lab and I've got to where I have. That's because I was afforded opportunities. I am very ambitious and driven, but, nobody has ever said, oh, you can't do that. They've always said, you've got to go on this training course. You've got to get your PTS. You've got to get this. Because not only was it good for me, it's also good for the company, because then I can go and work on track, and I can work on the motorway, and I can log whatever, chalk. And I think it's really important that any of the companies, when we're looking at recruitment, it's to have a career path for whoever they're trying to recruit, whether it's, if they're taking on a labourer, say, right, you're just starting here, but you can then go on to being a groundworks foreman and all the rest of it, and then a DSO, lead driller, senior driller, drilling manager, drilling director, whatever. There's a path for everybody, and it's up to the individuals where they feel most comfortable and where they want to take it. So I'm trying to say, if we want people to be attracted to the industry, we have to make it attractive, and we have to make sure that when we're recruiting people, we are investing in them as an individual and making sure that we're putting all of the things in front of them that will help them to progress with their personal career development, CPD days, releasing them to become chartered engineers, or taking the time and investing in things like the British Drilling Association so they can become an audited driller. But also just with the, with the MVQ, there's different levels. It's saying to somebody, okay, you've got an MVQ level 2, next time you're going to be doing level 3. And it's the same with the CSCS cards. Everybody starts off with the basic one. Well, I expect all of my staff, the longer they're with the company, they've got to be achieving that black card, the manager's card. There's no reason why they can't. And it's always putting in front of them, right, you've done that, well done, that's your next goal.
Yeah.
And pushing them and keeping them going. But as an industry, we need to make it really attractive and to give people the opportunity to attend courses, training, career development, all of these things. There has to be investment in staff. otherwise we've got nothing. It's making it, there's nothing really sexy about the ground investigation sector, but we've got to kind of make it seem more attractive. There's huge advances in what people are doing and investments that companies make, but we've got to just do more, and I'm absolutely certain it's about career development and creating those paths for everybody, not just engineers, but everybody in the industry.
I think you're right. So I actually ran a poll on LinkedIn in relation to kind of what's important to people when they're looking for new roles. So it included their salary, their progression, and projects. And progression was top, projects was the second, and money for most people was last. Of course, we all need money, but it's certainly not just a motivator. Well, we can pay an extra 3,000. Well, 3,000 over the year after you take off tax, etc. It's not really much. So it doesn't make any difference. But yeah, people want to be infused and feel like they're doing something that gives them value within that project. Maybe it's a large project for them. Maybe it's contamination remediation and doing some good for the environment. So it's different for each person. Projects and progression is definitely an important thing.
It is. And within our industry, I don't know anybody in the ground investigation industry that doesn't have pride in it. And when I say that, I mean, name me anybody that hasn't driven down a motorway and gone, I did a borehole over there, or I did a borehole there, I did some trial pits in that field or whatever, and go, oh, I was involved in the foundations for whatever. They genuinely do take pride in what they do and they're proud of it. And the industry as a whole is kind of like hidden because everything that we do gets built on top of. And nobody remembers or knows about the ground investigation. They just see this lovely shiny building or a dam or a motorway or a new railway or whatever. Nobody understands what actually happens to allow that to be constructed. And so I'm quite passionate about going into schools and explaining to people geology is a thing from quite young. Because people say, oh, I want to be a doctor or a vet or a thing. And I say, well, geologist is a thing and driller is a thing. And, I've been into lots of schools in Yorkshire in particular, and miner used to be a thing. It's not anymore, but it used to be a thing. And so I think there's a whole generation that has no idea what geotechnics, ground investigation, drilling is. If you say to somebody, oh, I work in the drilling industry, they'll say, oh, do you work on the rigs on the North Sea or whatever? I'm like, no. They have no idea that this whole industry exists. Going into schools, colleges and saying there is a career and it's called geotechnics and it's called ground investigation and it involves drilling for samples on land. And they're like, that's quite interesting. It's very interesting. You can take along some fossils and explain about the creation of the earth and how things happen. But then when you say, actually, if you're a geologist or a driller or you're working on these sites and some core comes out of the ground, it might be 350 million years old. And when you open it and there's a fossil in it, you're the first person, the first living thing on the planet to have ever seen that. And isn't that incredible? And you might have an ammonite that lived in the oceans millions of years ago, and you actually get it out of a rock that's at the top of a mountain. How did that happen? Plate tectonics. And it's that kind of thing. And then the students and young adults, they're all of a sudden like, oh, hang on a minute, this is quite interesting. And you think, well, yeah, it is. Why don't you get involved in the industry? And they go, I don't know how to. It's such a shame that geology is not on very many school curriculums anymore. I did geology at school in sixth form. I was very lucky. But there's physical geography, but it doesn't really go into depth about geology. And it, for schools and things, they should be saying, actually, there's a whole industry that you can get into. And it's really interesting. And, people go, oh, I want to work outside. I want to work in the fresh air. I want it to be different every day. And they go, oh, well, you need to be a firefighter. No, you don't. You need to be a geologist or a driller, because that's exactly what we do. It's different every single day. You work in a team, and I think it's exciting because you never know what you're going to find. And it's really interesting. It makes a difference, a huge difference to society, because after the investigation, there's a new stadium, there's a new school, there's a hospital, there's a railway. Things happen, all these things, and it's really interesting. But unfortunately, all of our efforts in the industry is underground, so people don't see it. But it's educating people that is a thing. Geology is a thing, and geologist, ground investigation it's an industry, and I think it shouldn't really be down to us as individuals within the industry to have to go to schools and things like that. But it's not going to happen unless we do. So, there's Simon Baxter at Soil Engineering and Eric Downey at RSK, and I know they go into schools, and I know lots of my colleagues do as well. And they give their time up to go into schools and to try and get that next generation interested. I think it's really important, not just for us as a company, but for us as an industry and for the construction sector as well, because where would we be without ground investigations? We've got to look at where ground investigations first came about, really. It's in the 1950s, there was minimal ground investigation, but people were building and constructing these huge poured concrete structures. The nuclear industry was just taking off, and concrete was the next best thing from sliced bread. And they have these huge continuous pours of concrete. And then if there was any movement in the ground whatsoever, then that concrete would crack, and then they'd have to start again. So there was the big companies like John Molam and Co. and Norwest Holst. They said, well, we've got to start looking at the geology and investigate the ground before we start doing these big construction projects. So they started these small in-house. The main tier one major contractors had little in-house departments to look at ground investigation and geotechnics. That's where soil engineering came from Norwest Holst. That's where soil mechanics, now Socotec, came from John Molam and Co. And then that's where it all grew. We're only 70, 80 years on, but ground investigation became really important in the 50s and 60s, and it got more and more important, and people saw the value in it because buildings weren't falling down or moving or anything was happening, and they could guarantee their builds. But then, as we've almost forgotten why we do site investigation. We've almost forgotten because it's 80 years on, and that generation has all retired. We're on to the third generation of specifiers and contracting and all the rest of it, and they go, why do we need ground investigation? Oh, we don't need it. Just have a couple of boreholes just because it says ground investigation, tick a box. But it will come back around again. And HS2, actually, and National Highways, they have brought to the fore just how important investment in ground investigation is. And I just hope it's going to spark a new generation who understand and appreciate how important it is. But there's the danger, because they'll start specifying more and more in-depth ground investigations, and we haven't got the engineers, the drillers, we haven't got the crews and the capability to do it, to meet that demand, because the schools have forgot that geology and drilling is a thing. So that's why some of my colleagues and peers go into schools and go, wake up, this is really good. And introducing them to a whole career path, start to finish. You can have a 50-year career in ground investigation. And I know everybody's like, oh, what's it called? These squiggly paths of different, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go travelling, I'm going to do whatever. And so, but, one student, it doesn't matter how many schools or colleges I go into, if I light the touch paper on one student and they come in and they do geology and they say, I did this because Natalie came and gave us a presentation.
Yeah. That's it. It's an achievement, isn't it? And you're right to go for the students who are young rather than when they're kind of at A level, because they have to have some enthusiasm in them prior to getting there, I think, and showing them fossils and saying that you'd be the first one to see it in front of them. That kind of sets off curiosity, especially in a child. So that is a kind of great way to do it.
That's it for part 1. To listen to more of Natalie, please tune into part 2.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ground Investigation Podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, then please support the show by leaving it a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts. For more information on what was discussed in this episode, click the link in the show notes now.